You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis
John Milius, our film school alum, a fellow alumnus, calls them PAP. I watch all of them. I've seen the first one, which is, I guess, the fourth one by a certain measure, and part of the second one, and so on. But the lesson that they put out there, I think, is a really, really affirmative, healing, positive message across the world. A very Judeo-Christian message, which is that the power of love is greater than the power of hate. The power of God is stronger than the power of Satan. The power of construction is bigger than the power of destruction. You have a fairy tale, and again, going back to ideas we were talking before. What's the idea behind Star Wars? I'll tell you what it is, and you already know what it is. It's a fairy tale in space. Mm-hmm. The bad guys abduct the princess, and the good guys rescue her. That's Star Wars, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what makes Star Wars so special? And the answer is the frame by frame, moment by moment, scene by scene action in it, and the dialogue that the characters speak, and so on. So George is a very he's not a very available kind of a guy. I don't think a lot of people would describe him as warm and cuddly. But when I worked with him, both on campus and off campus, it was certainly a professional arrangement and agreement, and whatever disagreements that were experienced were not unusual among artists working on a movie together.
Yeah, it's very understandable. And
I was actually his house guest. I remember my wife and I, in August of 1969, he had already left L.A. He was living up in Marin. And I love to say that my class at USC, we were the first to move on. When we came to film school, there was no tradition of moving from film school into the professional community. In fact, I have an article right now. It's just come out like yesterday or the day before in the current issue, the most recent issue, which has just come out, excuse me, of Written By, which is the Writers Guild monthly journal. And it's called Film School, Haven or Hoax. And I'm arguing that, in it, I'm arguing, of course, I have a vested interest in it, but I still believe it's observably, verifiably, empirically true that film school is not a hoax, but very, very helpful in getting, people into the movie business. I cite in the article 11 titles of movies directed or produced by Steven Spielberg that were written by, at least in part, by UCLA trained writers who have on-screen credits for those movies. 11 of them. Jurassic Park 1, 2, 3, Indiana Jones 2 and 3. That's 5 right there. The Terminal, Munich, Lincoln, War of the Worlds, Eagle Eye. Eagle Eye was produced by Steven. Travis Wright was the writer, our student a few years ago. What am I leaving out? The TV series, Amazing Stories. Our students in the last 6 or 7 years have had 5, just in the last 6 or 7 years, 5 Academy Award Best Screenplay nominations and have won 3 Oscars for Best Screenplay in the last 5 years. So between now and then, now being today and then being the time, now almost a half a century ago, that I was going to film school in classes with George Lucas, the big difference is that film school has gone from being a dead end professionally to being the single most advantageous way to enter the film industry. So I like to say that our class at USC, we were the first ones to go on to own Hollywood, except for George, who owns Marin County. So in any event, my wife and I in 1969, in August, we took a motor trip, just a vacation, a holiday up the West Coast. We drove all the way up ultimately to the Oregon border, the California-Oregon border, the Umpqua Dunes. There are some beautiful sand dunes along the Northern California, Southern Oregon coast. Just exquisite. We camped along there and so. But on the way, we stopped at San Francisco, and I remember I had we had brunch one Sunday morning in Sausalito with some old film schools pals, including George and Marcia. Also John Milius, if you know that name, I referred to him earlier. Mm-hmm. John, invented Schwarzenegger. He did Conan and bunches of other movies. John is probably best known for his script of Apocalypse Now. So it was my wife and I and George and Marcia and Milius, also Caleb Deschanel, who's probably famous now for being the father of very famous actors' daughters. But Caleb is, of course, himself a multi-nominated cinematographer. He's one of the most respected, the most successful cameramen in the history of the industry. And there were some other people. There was Walter Murch, who's very famous. Walter actually won 2 Oscars for sound design and something else in the same, year. The same Oscar ceremony. He had to come up twice to the stage to pick up his Oscars. He was there with his wife, Aggie, a British woman, and then was also Caleb, as I mentioned, and a producer, now a well-known producer, David Lester, who produced all of Ron Shelton's films, Bull Durham and on and on and on. And I remember Marcia invited us to be their house guest. We said, well, we're moving on up the coast tonight. Right after this meal, we're driving north. She said, but on the way down, if you want to stay with us, feel free. So we did. We were actually the house guests overnight when he was living in Mill Valley in Marin. It was before his gigantic success with Graffiti. Graffiti wouldn't come out yet for about 3 years. I think it was in 71 or 72. No, 73 it came out. It was released in 73. So we were all, film school pals. When I look back, at the time we weren't really aware of it. You got to look back to see it. But talk about right place, right time. I had come out, I thought, to California for 3 weeks from New York. And at the last moment, I just fell into film school at SC on a kind of a whim. Suddenly I turned around. It was 10 years later, I had never really planned to settle in California, much less to become a screenwriter, or much less to be a tenured professor, and legal expert and so on. There's a great example of staying open to the surprises in a life narrative. I think, I'm always telling writers, in your dramatic narrative and in your life narrative, stay open to the surprises. That all of the people I know who are enjoying what they're doing are also surprised by what they're doing. They're not doing what they planned to do. People who do what they plan to do are people, I know a lot of such people, and they are, for the most part, doctors. I grew up in New York City, and the big thing to be was a doctor. So I know a lot of medical professionals, and they're very successful. They're well paid and so on. But not all. Some of them are very happy, but not all of them. Many of them are unhappy. This one wishes he was an oceanographer. That one wishes he was a anthropologist. And all of them seem to wish they were also screenwriters. Sometimes it seems like. And the point is that, there's a Chinese curse, may your dreams come true. A curse. It's a little scary when you accomplish what you set out to accomplish and it doesn't really feel right. I have a friend who's just retired from medicine. He's done very, very well. He's respected. He's made a good living, but he's always been lukewarm at best about his career. Never really enjoyed it. On the other hand, I know another doctor, a friend of mine who went to medical school, but just didn't like practicing medicine. What he liked was computers. And very early in the computer revolution, he got into the writing of software for computerizing pathology labs. He was a pathologist. His specialty was pathology. And that branched on out to general medical, medical record keeping in general. They were computerizing all of that. Previously a doctor would see a symptom and would sort of think about it. Now you can, really search the databases, and this has resulted not just in convenience, but in the savings of countless lives, if you think about it. So my friend is, we were visiting with him. He lives in Seattle. We were visiting with him and his wife, dear old pals of ours, some months ago. And his house is on Lake Washington. There's a dock behind it, and on one side is his powerboat, and on the other side is his sailboat. Across the lake, and a little to the south is the Bill Gates compound. This guy has done real well, my friend, and he loves his work. And he didn't jettison his medical education. He very much exploited it, and that's not a dirty word. It just means make the most of it. He integrated it into his career, his very successful career, a career that he loves, that he just enjoys enormously. My point is, he's not doing what he expected to do, and he's loving it. And that's the point that I'm making is it's possible to overplan and kind of outsmart yourself in life.
And also, and you mentioned, Richard, sometimes wants to be a screenwriter, it's kind of like everyone, I think it was Joe Esterhaus, the screenwriter of Basic Instinct, once said, it used to be everyone wants to write the great American novel. Now it's the great American screenplay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Joe is a friend of mine. I know him well over a number of years, and I'm aware that he said that, and it seems to be true. It seems to be true. People want to, there are more people who years ago would have been writing novels that are now writing screenplays. I do both. I've just finished a novel, and I've had modest success in both areas. And it's interesting. I was just lecturing on this. This is my subject a week ago at the Pitch Fest. We were talking about how it's funny. Let me put it this way. There's a political figure. You've heard of Governor Christie from New Jersey. He's running for president. And I saw him sometime last week, early in the week. He was bitterly denying that he was what somebody had accused him of. Somebody had accused him, called him, and characterized him as a particular word, a very, very evil word, the most evil word that you can use to characterize a political figure that these days in this country. Can you guess what the word was? I'll tell you. Somebody called him a moderate. They said that he was moderate. Imagine it. That used to be like a compliment, He was denying that he's a moderate. Now, why do I bother you about that? Because there's a word in Hollywood that Hollywood seems to have come to hate. Are you ready? Original. They don't want to do anything original. In fact, the disappointing release of Tomorrowland, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Tomorrowland.
Yeah, with Clooney. They're kind of disappointed. They say that they're not going to do any more original movies, because of Tomorrowland is an original movie. They only want to do tentpoles, remakes, reboots, prequels and sequels, adaptations of material from other media. They don't want to do original screenplays, and I think that's a real pity because, what they're trying to do is play it safe, and playing it safe is the most hazardous course you can follow in art. You have to take the risks. You have to embrace the risks, invite, solicit, encourage the risks, it seems to me. And nevertheless, if you're a writer and you have an original screenplay, what are you going to do with that? Nobody's making original screenplays, or certainly the studios are not. They're not buying spec scripts and turning them into movies. They're developing projects inside. I had a writer who wants to he's a huge fan of Batman, and he wanted of the Batman franchise, and he wanted to pay me a substantial sum to give him notes on a Batman script that he wrote. I said, but you can't do anything with a Batman script. Warner Brothers own the rights to Batman. So he said, well, I'll show it to Warner Brothers. But Warner Brothers isn't going to look at a Batman script. They're not going to buy a speculated Batman script. They're going to develop it with writers they know, who work with producers they know. Those writers may very well be former students of mine, mind you, and I'm happy to brag about that. But they're not going to do this guy's script. Not only are they going to make it, they're not even going to read it, and they're going to make a point not to read it for reasons that go back to what we were talking about earlier, having to do with litigation. If it's Batman, it's certainly going to be similar. It's going to have certain similarities to the Batman franchise, don't you think? And then there'll be their lawyers at Warner Brothers will be telling you mustn't look at this, and you must send this back to him and tell him we haven't looked at it, we don't accept the unsolicited material and so on, because he's going to claim when the new Batman comes out that we really used it and we didn't. We stole it from them. So we're talking about originality. So how do you get around that as a writer? And the answer is, and I've had modest success with this repeatedly in my career. I don't consider myself to be any kind of superstar, but the Wall Street Journal calls me. They what did they say about me? They said, "Oh, I am a writer of substantial professional experience." There's no literary laundry I haven't taken in. I've written feature assignments, feature-length movie assignments for all of the studios, almost every studio. And I've sold material to all three major broadcast networks. And I have had almost half a dozen books published by all of them by major New York publishers. I've had bestsellers in nonfiction, my screenwriting books in print, over 30 years. My last novel made the Times list, bestseller list only for a week and only at number 13. But the Times list, it's not a small thing. And the reason I mentioned it to you is that my very first novel I had written as a screenplay, and I just couldn't. It's been said Hollywood is the one place on earth where you could die of encouragement. I had so much encouragement over that script, but what I never had was a nickel for it. And finally, there was a strike, and you couldn't market to Hollywood anyway. And so naively, I turned it into. I used it as an outline for a novel, and I wrote a novel. I was naive about how cruel the fiction market is, especially the first fiction market. And that naivete served me very well because I sold the thing right away. And had I been more savvy about the business, maybe I wouldn't have, invested the time and effort it would take to turn that into a novel, knowing how grim the chances were. So you understand how ignorance is your friend, naivete is your pal. Now, as soon as it was sold as a novel, it was sold as a movie. Warner Brothers, a studio that had turned it down when it was a screenplay, bought the same screenplay as soon as it had been published as a novel because it was no longer original. It was now an adaptation. It had been tested in another market. The executives, if every day in Hollywood that an executive doesn't have to make a decision about anything is a victory for her. She hasn't put her neck out. She hasn't risked anything. If you don't do anything, you'll never do anything wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So, and every movie that does get made starts with the anticipation by the executives who are responsible for spending the money to produce it. It starts with their expectation that it will fail. And they're trying to figure out how to explain away the anticipated failure of the movie. I don't see how that can do anything other than to suppress creativity and imagination and so on. But you understand how somebody could say if the movie comes out and it bombs, for example, Bonfire of the Vanities, which was produced by a friend of mine and a colleague of mine. He's also a professor at UCLA, Peter Guber, very successful producer. He was the head of Warner Brothers. He was the head of Columbia. He's produced a lot of major movies. Well, one of the movies that he produced, it was a terrible bomb. There's even a book written about it, was Bonfire of the Vanities. And when people say to him, Peter, how could you invest so much money in this turkey? He can say, I mean, you must be some lousy executive. We should get rid of you. He has a defense, and the defense is, wait a minute. This was a best-selling novel by Tom Wolfe. I also had Bruce Willis and Tom Hanks in the movie. The screenplay was adapted by Michael Christopher, a very, very distinguished, respected writer. The director was Brian De Palma. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. You understand what I'm saying? So suddenly, because with my own novel, when it was sold as a movie, the producer who bought it could say, if anybody asked him, how did you buy this? He could say, what do you mean Warner Books published this? You know, major publisher in New York published this. So I'm not the only one crazy enough to think that there's merit in this. So I've been recommending to writers that they contemplate, they write a screenplay, but instead of showing the screenplay, write an original screenplay. Certainly you don't want to do an adaptation of material that you don't own. I mean, there lie dragons. What are you going to do with something if you don't have the underlying rights? So what I'm recommending is they write an original screenplay, but then instead of marketing the screenplay at first, they use it as an elaborate outline for their novel and write it as a novel, and then try to sell the work as a novel. And once it's sold as a novel, they can get action as a screenplay. I've done that multiple times now, and right now I'm working on, I've just finished a novel that's based on a screenplay. I wrote the screenplay last summer, and now I finished a draft of the novel. It's just a draft. I still have to do a bunch of work on it. But once you've got the screenplay, most of the heavy lifting has been done. I regard, just like we were talking earlier about the most valuable part of the equation is the story. Once you've got the story all worked out, you've got the characters, the dialogue. I mean, most of that's there in the screenplay, isn't it? To turn that into a novel is relatively easy. Underscore relative. There's, relatively, there's not a, no writing is easy. But for me, the hardest part of writing is the heavy lifting is in devising, creating the plot, because the story really involves everybody else. Story is character. Story is dialogue. Story is description. It's everything. I mean, who's the richest character? I mean, imagine somebody say, well, wait a minute, Richie, what about character? Isn't that important? Well, who's the greatest character in all of English language dramatic literature? Isn't it Hamlet? Certainly Hamlet would be a good candidate, don't you think? What's the description? Have you ever read Hamlet? Do you remember the Playwright's description of Hamlet? Here it is. It's 3 words. Prince of Denmark. That's it. There's nothing about melancholy. So where does this Hamlet come from? And the answer is from the story, the stuff he does and the stuff he says inside the context of the story. So it's really all about story. So once the story is worked out, you have the opportunity to retell that story as a novel, and it's just easier to write a novel. It's easier because you're not stuck with just sight and sound like you are in a movie. You're not, we mentioned George Clooney a moment ago. I read a screenplay called The American. I didn't see the movie. It's a dreadful screenplay. Clooney was in it. I think the only reason George was in it because it was shot near where he lives in northern Italy, and he lives Lake Como at the edge of the Swiss border up there. And they shot it up there, so I think that's the only reason I can imagine that George would have been, had anything to do with this movie would be because it was convenient. It was in the neighborhood, so to speak. But in any event, there's a scene in the movie where the main character is at a cafe ordering a bottle of wine. He's with a girl, and the waiter comes up and offers him, taste of the wine, and he samples the wine, and it actually says in the script that he takes a sip of the wine. It tastes slightly flinty with notes of chestnut and cinnamon. Wait a minute. How does anybody know sitting in a movie theater watching that on screen what something tastes like? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I knew exactly what you mean.
This writer, doesn't understand the most fundamental aspect of screenwriting, which is you're stuck with sight and sound. It's just sight and sound. it's easier to write a novel because you're not stuck with. You can say what somebody remembers, what they think, how they feel. You know, the greatest compliment that's ever been paid me is that Final Draft, the software, I'm sure you know of it, the screenwriting software, has actually created, I don't know if it's available yet, they are creating for me, in consultation with me, the Richard Walter template. You know, like if you want to write a Simpsons script, for example, you can punch up Simpsons. You know, there's a pull-down window in Final Draft, and you can go to Simpsons, and you click that, and it'll immediately give you the formatting that the the Simpsons likes, that the Simpsons uses. And I don't mind telling you that a colleague of mine has won several Emmys for on The Simpsons, and a bunch of our students have written for The Simpsons. And one of them, this makes me sad because he died young in his 40s, a wonderful writer, a wonderful guy, very successful in not just in TV, but also in features. He wrote Thor, he wrote Supergirl, very, very fine writer. He was the co-producer, what do they call him, co-executive producer of The Simpsons and a writer for the Simpsons. So Final Draft has a Simpsons template. They now have a Richard Walter template. If you punch up me, you'll get format that conforms to my particular desires. For example, if you write EXT for exterior, you know, it's like ext or int. I was taught that you don't put, and I preach it, you should not put a period after that. And in Final Draft, if you go to the Richard Walter template, it'll get rid of that period that comes after EXT. Now, somebody might say, gee, that seems like a pretty petty point. But actually, I think it's the most important, the most profound point in all of creative expression. And the point is simply this: there shouldn't be anything in the script that doesn't serve the script. That is to say, it doesn't move the story forward. And if you get into the kind of mindset that leaves out even the period after exterior, then you'll leave out lines of dialogue that you don't need. You'll leave out whole characters that you don't need. You'll leave out whole scenes that you don't need. If you follow what I'm saying. So, in any event, the only reason I'm telling you about this is that in the Richard Walter template for Final Draft, they are now having, we're tweaking it, and in the wide margin description, if a word like realizes, feels, remembers, thinks appears, it's going to get highlighted, a little zigzaggy line underneath, or some attention will be called to it, to ask the writer, do you really want to say this? Is this something that the audience can see or hear? Because if it's an interior mental thing, it has no place in a movie. But in a novel, I mean, everything in it that's interior or mental in a movie has to come out of sight and sound. You know, Marilyn's eyes widen in what can only be the realization that Harry left the gun in the nightstand at the motel. You understand what I'm saying? It's got to be told from a visual standpoint, answering the question, never mind the reader of this ink on the page. I want to know how the viewer in the movie theater watching it on the screen is going to know this information. But in a novel, you can just spill it out. And you can also write in the past tense or in the future tense. I wrote a novel that's set in the past, in the present, and the future. And in the past, I tell it in the past. And in the future, I tell it in the future tense. And in the present, I tell it in the present tense. She goes to the door, she opens it, he stands there. You know what I'm saying? So you don't have to worry about that in a novel. You can do anything you want. Also, novels are longer, and it's easier to write longer than shorter. Not everybody gets that. There's it's like it's easier to ride a bike fast than slow. You know what I'm saying?
It's very true. You're absolutely right.
There's a letter from Hemingway. There's a very famous letter from Ernest Hemingway. He was in Cuba. I think he was working on The Old Man and the Sea. And he wrote a letter to his legendary editor, Maxwell Perkins. And it was 9 pages long, on and on and on and on and on about this and that and the other thing, and aspects of the script, of the manuscript, the typescript, for Old Man of the Sea and this and that and the other thing. Finally, halfway down the middle of page 9, he says, well, that's about it for now, Max. He says, please forgive me for writing such a long letter. I didn't have the time to write a short one. It takes longer to be quick and to the point and to cull and select and do the things that artists have to do. So I think there's really something to be said for writers taking another tack, trying their script out as a novel, trying to get some traction there, and if they do, suddenly it becomes viable as a movie project because it's no longer original. They've taken the, quote, curse, close quote, off of it by removing its originality and making it an adaptation. So, just some thoughts. Just some thoughts.
It's funny you mentioned that, Richard, because I'm actually a Final Draft not only affiliate, but I also am part of their program where we get like beta testing.
I'm sorry, whose program? I missed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually a part of Final Draft's.
Final Draft, yes, yes.
Not only their affiliate program, but also their beta testing. So, like, I get the new stuff before anybody else, and get feedback. I haven't got a chance to actually check that template out, but I'm going to keep my eye out because. Yeah,
I've been working with Alejandro Seri, who's one of their guys, a great guy. And I don't know if it's available or not yet. I think it's you can sort of upload it depending what version you have and so on.
Yeah, and because right now the latest thing that I've been beta testing is they have a new app out for the iPhone, and that's what I've been beta testing a lot of, just giving them feedback and hey, I'd like to see this feature, I wouldn't like to see this feature, stuff like that. And but I'm going to keep an eye out for that template. I'm going to actually, because if it's available, I will definitely upload that.
Well, thank you. I'm honored that you would. It's not radically different. But I am a big believer in less is more. No continueds, absolutely nothing. I've argued for years and years and years that if you can embrace this very, very fundamental precept, which is what we were just saying earlier, that it's just sight and sound. And if you can add to that just one thing, and that is that every sight and every sound must move the story forward some palpable way, some identifiable way. It doesn't matter what you write. It doesn't matter what this so-called genre is. It doesn't matter what happens. People will be drawn to it. You can even have nothing happen. And if somehow nothing happening can move the story forward, people will pay very, very rapt attention to nothing happening, and I'll give you an example of that. A student of mine, God bless him, he blurbs my book very prominently, Alexander Payne, in one of his best movies, I think, about Schmidt, starring Jack Nicholson. I think it's Nicholson's best work. The movie opens with Jack just sitting alone. He's an insurance salesman. It's just clearly his last moment, literally his last minute on the job before he retires. And he just sits at the desk, and absolutely nothing happens. But the camera kind of wanders around the room, and you can see the only motion in the room is the sweep second hand of the wall clock. And it's ticking off the seconds. It's like 40 seconds before 5 o'clock. And when it hits 5, he gets up and he leaves, that's the scene. But it tells you so much about that man and how punctual he is and how afraid he is and how this he is and how that he is and so on, that you get really, really drawn into that. So that's why my template, if you can get into it, if you can find it, you'll see that it really preaches minimalism, that you should keep everything off the page that you can keep off the page. If you look at my books, you'll see the front page of a screenplay. I have a model of a front page of a screenplay, and then I have a model of what not to do. And the model of what you should do is just the title of the script, the name of the writer. It shouldn't say written by, or even merely by, much less an original screenplay written by, in case you're worried somebody might think it's a chicken salad sandwich or a bowling ball or something. Well, what if it just says by, written by? What does that tell you? It tells you nothing. If it simply says bottom dollar, Sam Smith, people we're going to figure this script is called Bottom Dollar, and this guy Sam Smith probably wrote it, you know. And then on the only other thing you should have on that page is a phone number and an email address. Contact info. Now, if you have an agent, she's going to be sending out on her own. She's not going to want potential buyers to contact the client. She's going to want them to contact her. And by the way, the author should not want to be contacted directly. Be suspicious if anybody contacts you directly. If you have a representative, if they're legitimate, if the producer's legitimate, they should be willing to and eager to call the producer. You know what I'm saying? So it's different if the thing is sold. But if it's a speculative script, it should just have the name of the script, the title of the script, and the name of the writer. And as I say, a phone number, one phone number, only one phone number. I have a bunch of phone numbers. I have my UCLA number. I have my home number. I have a cell number. I have a special number in my home office. They don't want all of that. They don't want my mother's number. They don't want my lawyer's number. Just one number and one email address so that you can be found if people are interested. And as I say, if it even simply says buy, somebody who puts that on the front page doesn't get it. That right on the cover of the script is information that serves no purpose at all. What is the likelihood that somebody's going to miss that but get character and story and dialogue and all of the sophisticated and heady and provocative precepts and principles that apply to the art and the craft and the business of screenwriting? It's not encouraging. So again, that's what you'll see is very, very minimal. Anything that can be lost, you should lose. And if you're in doubt about something, you sort of feel, well, maybe you need this, but maybe then you lose it. If you're in doubt, throw it out. Just have stuff that absolutely must be there. And it's so easy to figure out what must be there. You just ask yourself, what if it weren't there? Does it still make sense? If it makes sense without it being there, then it wasn't needed. If the whole thing falls apart without, when it's not there, then it was needed. You follow what I'm saying? It's like there's a joke. A guy goes into a library, and he steps up to the desk, and he says to the librarian, I'll have a hot dog and a Coke and French fries, please. And the librarian says to him, sir, this is a library. He says, oh, I'm sorry. I'll have a hot dog, French fries, and so whispers it. You get the joke? It's like you're not supposed to talk loud in a library. He thinks that she's reprimanding him for talking too loudly rather than for ordering food at a library desk. You follow the joke?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the reason I tell you that joke is you can imagine if that were a screenplay, a portion of a screenplay, you would absolutely have to have the parenthetical direction whispers. Sir, this is a library. Harry, whispering. And then the line again. You with me? If you don't have it there, the person isn't going to whisper, and the whole joke is lost. So you needed the parenthetical. But that's the exception. One of my great battles is against parentheticals. It's a sure sign of amateurism when there are a lot of parentheticals. Wryly, drolly, angrily, smiling, sadly. Shakespeare got through 36 or 37 plays, not a single parenthetical. Hamlet, melancholy, never. So you want the least, and you can figure out what the least is by asking yourself, what if this weren't here? Does it still make sense? Then we didn't need it. So that answers the question that every artist is confronted with, which is what needs to be in the work and what doesn't. And why doesn't everybody do that? And the answer is it takes time to do that, and that's what people won't give it. They just won't give it the time that it takes.
One of my mentors, Bill Boyle, he actually wrote a book called The Visual Mindscape of the Screenplay. Mm-hmm. And he goes into that in depth that you have to take out anything that is not, it's always about what's on the screen all the time,
Yes.
and it always and he's in that way because he says he always would see people handing in screenplays and they would say things that like what someone is thinking in a screenplay, and he's like, how can we show that stuff?
Exactly. Evelyn remembers that she left the car idling. Well, what does that look like on the screen? Somebody remembering something, and how are you going to know? Let's say the actor looks up remembering in Acting for Dummies, if there is such a thing, and is able to put on the remembering face, if there is such a thing. Then how do we know what they're remembering? Again, it's so simple. It's really very simple to know what to do to succeed. Why doesn't everybody succeed? Because it's hard to do it. It's easy to know what you do. It's like I know exactly what to do to hit a home run. I'm sitting here about 2 miles from Dodger Stadium, and I know exactly what you have to do. You have to get the bat around in the right place at the right time. The difference between me and Babe Ruth is that he could do it. He didn't merely know how to do it, but actually could do it. I know how to do it, but I can't do it. I don't have the equipment to do it. So it's really, that's really all there is to it. And again, the reason people don't do it is they're in too much of a hurry. I had a writer just tell me this is already her third draft. Well, come on, David Koepp. I bet you know the name, Koepp, a former student of mine, a writer-director. He wrote, Mission Impossible, Jurassic Park 1 and 2. Right now he's writing the second chapter of for Ron Howard of the Da Vinci Code. I mean, he's a gigantic successful writer, also a very, very sweet man. He says the secret of his success is 17 drafts. He knows he can get through 17 drafts. He says it takes 17 drafts. So here's somebody complaining to me about their third draft, and they don't like hearing me telling them, you're just getting started. If you could get one more draft out of this, then you'll only need about 13 more after that, And that stops a lot of people. They just don't have the, what some people call the Sitzfleisch, the ability to sit there. The flesh that will tolerate just sitting there, reworking it.
In my own experience, Richard, I wrote it was like a comedy horror movie, and it was at a summer camp. And
what summer camp?
It's a made-up summer camp that I had. And I'm about 7 or 8 drafts in now, and some people feel that these drafts. Some people have said who've read it. They said, "Listen, these drafts are better." Some are saying, you're starting to get maybe a little too far away from the original concept. And I sort of judge for myself. I sort of have to say, who's right in this situation. Well, and I sort of go back and there was at one point, I'm going to be honest, Richard, I was so burned out from rewriting this thing. I was like, I was fearing opening up Final Draft and looking at this thing again.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's every writer has that experience. It's actually a good sign, but do go on.
And at that point, I actually, I printed it out. And one of my favorite things to do is actually just print it out, and I make marks with just a pen. Sort of I cut myself off from all technology, and
yes.
It's just me and a 90 or 100 page.
That's an excellent thing to do. I also think it really makes a lot of sense to write something else, put it aside, work on something else, and then you'll be able to come back to it with fresh eyes. Over the last number of years, I've become a fanatic crossword puzzle guy. I do the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle every Sunday. And one thing that I learned doing crossword puzzles is you go through, you get what you can get, and then there's stuff you just can't get. And finally, you're just reading all the clues, and you filled in maybe a little less than half the thing, and you can't get another freaking thing. You just can't. And you feel defeated and stupid and so on. You put it aside, just go up and do something else. You come back to it later, you sit down, and suddenly wham, 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 this thing, that thing, this thing. It all leaps, into relief. that you can write in and almost run your hand over and feel it like a frieze on a temple, a carved marble frieze. And it teaches me that just like the body gets tired, the muscles get tired, the mind gets tired. And when you rest the muscles and they recover, so also can you rest the mind and it recovers. And you look away from something, you look at something too careful, you really can't see it. You kind of look away and then you look back and there it suddenly is. I'm reminded of when I was an undergraduate student in Binghamton, New York, as a history major in college. Binghamton is in Broome County, New York. And I remember going through some original letters that had to do with Broome County history, and they had been written in like the early 1800s. And there was they were concluded in some state archive, some county archive or something like that. They were contained there. They were housed there. And they're written in this ancient kind of script, handwriting. And sometimes I just can't read what it says. I remember my teacher telling me, you're looking at it too hard. Look away from it, then kind of sneak up on it. And suddenly in context, it all leaps out, Mm-hmm. So if you take time away from it, you're really stuck with your script. You're talking about your 8th draft. And when I say you, I mean any writer. What about put it aside for a while and work on something else and then come back to it? And as far as you're getting too far away from your original concept, maybe there's something better than your original concept. Maybe you've taken it to a place that's even better for it to be. One more thing on this subject, and it goes back to David Koepp in the 17th draft. He says very often the latest drafts mimic the earliest drafts. You sort of get back to the beginning of it, and you get back to that context, that original concept that you had. And that might seem like a ferocious waste of time, but it wasn't. You needed to go through all of that to see that this is the way it really ought to be. I was talking to a writer only the other week, a few weeks ago, who was, I ran into, I hadn't seen him in a long time, a guy I know pretty well, but I hadn't seen him in a long time, and he said, how you doing? He says, well, much better now. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I was stuck for 10 months this year. I was struggling with this script, and I just suffered and hesitated and stumbled and just couldn't make any progress with it at all. And it haunted me and it tortured me. And then finally, 2 weeks ago, I just settled in and said, screw this, I'm going to do this. And I went right through it and I got it and nailed it, and it's just great. And that's why I'm upset. I said, I don't understand why is that upsetting? It sounds like a nice thing. He said, well, I struggled with this thing for 9 or 10 months. Why didn't I just do this 10 months ago, and I wouldn't have had all of the darkness and all of the pain that I had. And I said to him, you couldn't have done this 10 months ago. You needed to struggle and suffer and have all of this pain and live all of this life of the last 9 or 10 months to become the person that you are, that could, who's also the person that could finish this script, that could, write this script. So that's the way it goes. Nothing new about writers beating up on themselves.
So what I ended up doing was actually I did work on something else. At that point I said, you know what, I think I should just take a break from this, and
yes.
I'm thinking about coming back to it very soon, and because it's been about probably a month or maybe a month and a half. And I think now it's probably better. I can come around full circle now and just again start draft 9 and see where that takes me.
Look, my first novel was, I told you about it earlier. I had written it as a screenplay and couldn't get any action on it. I wrote it as a novel and then sold it as a screenplay. Years later, and by the way, it got me a lot of work. It was an adolescent coming-of-age story, and given that in my drafts of American Graffiti, which is an adolescent loss of innocence, rite of passage, coming-of-age story, I was able to get a lot of work. I was kind of the go-to guy for adolescent coming-of-age stories, loss of innocence stories in Hollywood. That novel, after I saw, and it's a kind of I grew up in New York City, and I sang doo-wop in the streets with friends of mine and so on. So it's about this doo-wop group that never really succeeds, but they learn that if you sing in harmony, you'll live in harmony, And after I started thinking about it as a stage play, as a musical. But I needed a songwriter, and then after I saw Jersey Boys, I've seen it several times on Broadway. I realized no, it could be a jukebox musical, and so I rewrote it I adapted it for the musical theater using existing tunes, just like the Carole King show and the Motown musical, and Jersey Boys, are just examples. There are a lot of them now that are not using original music, but that's why they're called jukebox musicals, because they use existing tunes. So I suddenly realized I could do it as a jukebox musical. So I rewrote it as a jukebox musical. 2 years ago, it was workshopped at UCLA. There was a humble read-through, sing-through, directed by one of the professors in the musical theater program in our sister department theater. And it was the most satisfying, fulfilling, creative experience I've ever had in my career. This humble little read-through. Now there's somebody eagerly showing the play around, trying to get a production for it. Probably nothing will come of it, but it might. The crazier things have happened. But the point is, and the reason I bother you with it, telling you about it, is look how long I've been in business with this thing. It goes back over 40 years. Between the time that I first started outlining what became the screenplay, which ultimately became the novel, and so on. My most recent novel, which I bragged to you, made the Times list. I also wrote originally as a screenplay. And I'm talking about over 30 years ago, probably 31 or 32 years ago. I wrote it as a screenplay. It was optioned and dropped, I made some money on it. It was optioned by, an Oscar-winning, multi-Oscar-winning independent company, very prestigious company. So I made some money on it, but I never got anywhere with it. It never got produced. So eventually, a student of mine at UCLA, I was talking about the project. He said he'd love to read it, so he convinced me to let him read it. And he came to me and he said, "You should use this as an outline for a novel, a comic novel." So I did. And when that was done, I showed it around to the publishing business, and I couldn't get any interest in it at all. All I had with it was frustration and heartache and as I say, disappointment. Then, I'd made some money on it, in the early days when it was a film script and I got those options, but generally it had been a pretty big disappointment. Then I met an editor, I met a very powerful agent. I have been so privileged in my life to do the things that I've done. One of them is for 5 summers, I would take the whole family to Maui for the Writers' Conference late in the summer. And if it had been in a Motel 6, that'd be okay. It's Maui. But it wasn't in the Motel 6. It was in the Grand Wailea 5-diamond luxury spa hotel resort, just an incredible place. And there I would meet all of these heavyweights from both literature and film. We mentioned Stephen King earlier. Stephen was there. They had world-class writers both in the movie business and in the literature business. And I remember I met an agent there, and she said to me, a very powerful New York agent, and she agreed I pitched the project to her, and she agreed to read it on the mainland when she got back to the mainland. So I sent it to her in New York, and she called me up and she said, and this is 20 years after I had first written it, and about 15 years ago, if you're with me, she said, I have to tell you, I read your typescript, and I think it's great, and I want to represent it, and I'll represent it exactly as it is if you want me to. I'll send it out exactly as you've written it. However, I have an editor here in the office that I work with, and I think you should get notes from Miriam. And if you don't like the notes, then the hell with it. I'll, throw them away. I'll show the book as is. But I have to tell you, Richard, she said to me, that when my authors work with Miriam, I sell their stuff right away. Now, I charge thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for notes, and they're not charging me a nickel for this, you understand? Now, I wanted to say to them, please, I'm not interested in rewrite. I had nothing but grief from this project. And I'm depressed and lost at this moment in my life, and I hardly feel like going into some old, thing that's been nothing but disappointment all the way. And you've already said you'd show it as it is, so just show it as it is. I didn't say this, mind you, David. This was my thinking, you understand. So I said to myself, don't tell her how much you hate the notes until you see the notes. In other words, wait for the notes and then tell them that, you really appreciate Miriam doing what she did, but no, you want to stick with what you had and the hell with it. So you don't have to do any more work, right? And by the way, who the fuck is this Miriam? Some 23-year-old who just got out of, creative writing major from Swarthmore or Bryn Mawr or one of them Moors, Don't they know who I am? And on and on and on. That kind of inflated view of self that a writer can get and become his own worst enemy. Of course, I said none of that. Well, that was my thinking. So finally the notes come from Miriam. By the way, it's Miriam Goderich. She's now a partner in the agency. It's Distal Goderich now. And I read Miriam's notes, and you know what, David? The notes, my heart sinks like a stone when I read these notes because they're such good notes. And I know I'm looking at my worst enemy, and when I brush my teeth, when I shave, if you follow me, if I don't get my butt in the chair, my hands on the keys, and find the old files and get back into it, right? So I certainly didn't want to do that, but I did. And by the way, the moment I'd written 2-3 sentences, I suddenly was born again. The fog lifted, the depression was gone. I was healed by the wonderful nurturing juices that flow through the system when you get involved in creative expression. And it took me a couple of months, to get the script attended to in the way that had been recommended. And then I got it back to the agency, and bingo, they sold it right away. As I've told you, it made the Times list, bestseller. It's a Times bestseller. And there was a lot of movie action around it, but nothing ever came of it as a movie. Now, if all that ever comes of it is it was a best-selling novel, that's not so bad thing, is it? But guess what? I'm going to London. I'm going to be at the London Screenwriters Festival in October. And a British producer called me. He said that he's actually an American producer, but he's British-based. He's London-based. And he said he has this was a few years ago. This was 3 or 4 years ago. He'd come upon the novel, and he thought it'd make a great movie. And he wanted to option the rights to it. Well, nothing ever came of that, more frustration and disappointment. Now suddenly he calls me. Just coincidentally, I'm going to be in London in the fall. And he says, guess what? He made a movie with he produced a movie that was directed by a new director, a short film. And on the strength of that short film, that director has been signed by a very, very prominent agency. And they have asked him to bring projects to them that he would like to do. So he asked this producer, and the producer called me and said, is your novel still available? And it is. So right now, as we're talking, it's being shown, not by me, but by an artist who's been signed by a major agency who've asked him to show them stuff that he wants to do. Do you understand how much better that is for the material to be exposed to them that way than for me, the author, to call their attention to it? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And on top of that, it's conceivable that they will be showing it to producers and production companies. I would rather be represented, if anything comes of it, by a lawyer rather than an agent. But if they want to go out with this thing and they approach me and they want me to let them represent them on it, I'll do that in a heartbeat. It's better for me to have them motivated, extra motivated. Follow my reasoning there? If they can represent me as well as the director, they're going to be that much more motivated to sell the thing. So the likelihood is nothing will come of it. But here we are. We're talking in 2015, midway through the year just about. And I'm still in business on this thing that I started writing in like 1980. So you see what a mistake it is for writers to do what they often do, which is they write a script that doesn't sell. That's the end of it. They think it was a failure. Mistake, 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 mistake.
Yeah, and that's very true. I have a friend of mine also who he's in his 40s or 50s, but he wrote a screenplay in his 20s, and then suddenly that's becoming a light again. And again, like you were saying, it's amazing how these things get new life. Years later.
David Webb Peoples, he won the Oscar for Unforgiven. It was also best movie that year. Clint hung on to that script for 20 years. And Clint made another movie that was very successful. Didn't win the Oscar, but it was very successful, about the Secret Service guy takes the bullet for the president. In the Line of Fire. Mm-hmm. And that's another script that was hanging around for 15, 16 years. The writer of that script was packing the trunk of his car and getting ready to, go back in defeat with his tail between his legs back to New Hampshire when the phone rings. It's Malpaso, Clint's company. And, they want him to know that they want him to come in for some meetings about brushing up the script. They now have a schedule. They're going to go ahead and, produce it for $88 million, something like that. You just never know. People don't understand that when a script doesn't sell, it's not the end, it's just the beginning. That script might sell eventually, but even if it doesn't, it's a sample of your craft. It could lead to representation. It could lead to a development deal on another notion that you have in mind. It could lead to a rewrite assignment. I've seen all of these things happen. They've happened to me. They've happened to writers that I know. And that is why it is a terrible, self-defeating mistake to imagine that a script that doesn't sell, that's the end of it, it's a failure. The very first script I ever wrote, I wrote in a class at USC. It was in the legendary, the instructor was the legendary Irwin R. Blacker, who was George's teacher and John Milius's teacher, and on and on. That script never sold, but I got top flight representation as a result of it. I got onto staff at Universal. Here I was a young kid. I was in my 20s. And I had an office at Universal with my name on the door, a parking place next to Paul Newman's parking place, I noticed. A ridiculously generous salary, at least it seemed that way at the time, actually adjusted for inflation, was pretty generous. And it all came about from a script that hasn't sold, to this day. So to consider that script to be a failure is lunacy.
Yeah, and very true.
The business is hard enough on writers. Writers don't need to be hard on themselves, is the point that I'm making.
And that's an excellent point. And that sort of leads me into one of my last questions. I know we've been talking about 2 hours. I know I've been taking up a lot of your time. I'm delighted
to chat with you. I want to make sure we do cover. I do talk a little bit about the summer session class that I offer. So go ahead and ask me a question, and then I'll talk a little bit about that.
That's actually the question I was going to ask you was, I know you have an upcoming summer session, and this is the only time of the year where non-UCLA students can sign up. And
correct.
I wondered if you could just, talk a little bit about the class and for anyone listening who's, interested in signing up.
Well, the first thing I'll say is just the housekeeping. If you want to find out official information about it, you can do that by simply going to my website, richardwalter.com. There is no S at the end of my name, richardwalter.com. And I think the very first thing on the site is a link that will take you to the UCLA site that describes enrollment procedures and tells you a little bit about the class. It also tells you something wrong about the class, which is that there are certain prerequisites. For the summer session, all prerequisites are waived. And the class is open to. The class is especially designed for the summer session. I've taught it for over 30 years now. It meets starting on June 22nd, Monday, June 22nd, Monday afternoon for the next 5. That is a total of 6 Monday afternoon sessions. It's not a lecture course. It's a hands-on writing course where you get the main activity of the class is the in-class examination of in-progress scripts being written by students in the class. So you get not only the support of the teacher and the teaching assistants, but also your fellow writers around the table. And one thing that has touched me very deeply all these years at UCLA is how generous everyone is, all the writers are with everybody else, how much support that the writers give each other. I feel like I've learned much more than I've ever taught, being at UCLA, and my students are my teachers. So you get all of that alive. It's not online, it's alive in a classroom. And it is a rare course in that it's very difficult to get into it. Even if you're a registered, matriculated UCLA student, it's very hard to get into an advanced film class with senior faculty like me. So this is an opportunity to do that, not only for UCLA students, but even for students who are not enrolled at UCLA. And by the way, everybody gets 8 credits for it. Those credits are useful at anybody, for anybody at any University of California campus, but also they're transferable, depending upon the attitude of the institution, they're transferable to other institutions. Though I would say most people taking the class really aren't interested in the credits, they're interested in getting the attention and consideration that, our regular students get when they write their screenplays. So it's a really upbeat 6 weeks together. And it's limited enrollment. It's almost sold out. But there is still some room for some people. I want you to know that I don't get paid per student. I don't get paid on a per student fee. I get a flat fee. And the only reason I tell you that is that I'm not trying to self-aggrandize here. I'm not against self-promotion, and I'm not against making money. But I'm not. I don't get any extra money if extra students enroll or anything like. I just want anything like that. I just want your readers and listeners, the people that you reach, I want them to know that this is a rare opportunity. It's not that widely known. It is available to them, and we crank up 2 weeks from Monday. It's not too late to register. People commute, by the way. It's obviously most convenient for people in the Southern California region, but there are people who commute from all across the country. I had somebody last summer commuting from Illinois. The previous summer I had a couple. They were a doctor and his wife commuting every Monday. They would fly in to L.A. from El Paso and take the class and then fly back, either late that night or the following morning. That's how motivated people are to take the class, and I would commend it to all of the people that you reach.
And I've known people who've actually taken the course, I'll mention their names when we get off, Richard, because you probably remember a few of them, and they spoke very, very highly of the course. Oh,
thank you.
And and again, I mean, to work with someone who's actually been in the fields, been in the trenches, it's just, it's unbelievable. And I will link to your upcoming class in the show notes. And everyone, I also recommend you check out Richard's book, Essentials of Screenwriting. I have a copy behind me. I swear, Richard, you can't see it, but it's on the massive bookshelf behind me. but Richard, I've taken up so much of your time today. I want to say thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. I enjoyed chatting with you. I really, truly did, David.
Oh, and I would love to have you back on if you ever wanted to.
Absolutely. You know how to reach Kathy. She kind of handles my calendar, and I'd love to come back. It'd be a pleasure to do that.
Excellent, because there's a ton of questions that I never got a chance to ask you, because there's so many, and there's so many things we could talk about.
Well, one thing I've learned about questions and answers, and that is really good answers just lead to more questions, So, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is the nature of learning.
Absolutely. Everyone, you could check Richard at richardwalter.com. And
yes, Rich, exactly right.
And I'm going to link to his site and social media accounts in the show notes as well as to the UCLA class that he's teaching, which starts June the 22nd. Everyone, you can reach me at davebullis.com, and Twitter it's at Dave_Bullis. And Richard, I want to say one more time, thank you again for coming on. And
thanks for having me, David. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I so look forward to chatting with you again.
We will do it for sure.
Amazing. Again, everyone, thanks again for listening. And Richard, I wish you have a great day, and best of luck with all your projects.
Back to you, and thank you so kindly.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Find Dave at davebullis.com.
Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.